Deep in the haunted woods of Bitter Ash Trailhead, a lone hiker follows a cursed lantern into the darkest night of his life. You're listening to ASMR. 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I remember the way the air smelled the first time I stepped out of my truck. At the Bitter Ash Trailhead, the night was still warm from the day, but there was a kind of heaviness in the breeze, like it had passed over water and through the branches of old trees that had been standing there long before my granddad was even born. There was no moon that night, only a sliver hiding behind fast-moving clouds. But the trail marker gleamed in my headlights, the wooden sign carved deep with the name Bitter Ash, and a warning from the Park Service about seasonal closures and fire danger, the kind of sign you see at most rural trailheads in America. But this one had more to it: small etchings from pocket knives, initials and dates, and the faint outline of a lantern that didn't look like any official Carvingi had driven out there. Because a buddy of mine had told me about the place, said it was the creepiest trail in the county, and that people had gone missing out there years back. Not hikers getting lost like in the news, but people found later in strange places way off the trail. Then no signs of injury, the coroner writing up the cause of death as exposure or hypothermia. Even though the weather had been mild, their bodies positioned almost neatly with their hands folded over their chests, they walked toward the start of the trail. Gravel crunching under my boots, the sound echoing strangely like it was bouncing off trees, were much closer than they looked. My flashlight beam caught pale bark and shifting shadows, and for a moment I thought I saw movement deep between the trunks, but when I stopped to listen, I heard nothing but the wind pressing through the leaves, slow and steady like someone breathing in and out. First half mile was a slow incline, the dirt path winding through pines and twisted oaks, the branches interlocking overhead so tight that even when the clouds moved you couldn't see stars. I remember thinking it felt like walking into a tunnel made of wood. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the night itself was closing around method. I saw a faint glow up ahead on a bend in the trail, pale yellow, swaying slightly like a lantern, being carried by someone walking slow. I stopped and called out, "Hey, out here," kind of late on. My voice sounded wrong in the air, like it didn't belong in that space, and as soon as I said it, the glow went still. I took a couple steps forward, the dirt under my boots soft and damp like it had just rained. Even though the forecast had been dry for a week, the glow started moving again, pulling deeper into the bend and vanishing before I could round the corner. When I did, there was nothing there, no figure, no light, just the sound of the wind and the smell of something sharp and metallic like old Penisi. Figured maybe I was catching reflections from some hiker's headlamp, or maybe there were campers off trail, though it was against the rules. But as I walked on, I started noticing things that made less and less sense. Small piles of stones right on the edge of the trail, stacked 3 high and perfectly balanced, all the same size each one, with a tiny black feather on top. By the time I'd gone another quarter mile, the glow appeared again, this time closer and brighter. I could almost make out a shape in it, like the outline of a glass globe, and the dark figure of a hand holding the handle above it. My first thought was that it was an old-style railroad lantern, the kind my great-uncle had in his shed when I was a kid, but the light from this one didn't spill out. Normally it bent and curled into the air like smoke made of light. He called out again this time, asking if they needed help. No answer. The glow swayed, once then drifted off the trail into the trees. I hesitated. I knew better than to leave the marked path out here. The Park Service always made a point about how easy it was to get turned around, but something in me felt pulled toward it like I'd regret not finding out where it led. So I stepped off the trail into the underbrush, the ground soft and spongy like moss under my boots. The glow moved ahead of me, always just far enough that I had to keep going to stay close. I could hear my breathing, louder than the wind now, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. For maybe 200 feet, the trees opened into a small clearing, the grass wet and pressed flat in the middle as though something heavy had been lying there. The glow hovered above the flattened grass, and I could see it clearly now, an old metal lantern. Its glass cracked, the light inside it flickering like candle flame. But too bright to be a candle, there was no one holding it. It floated on its own, about chest height, swaying as if in a breeze I couldn't feel. The moment I stepped closer, the light surged white hot, and every sound in the clearing stopped. The wind, the insects, even my own breath felt stolen from me. The air tasted bitter and sharp, my eyes watering from the brightness. When it dimmed again, the lantern was gone, and I was standing alone in the clearing. I noticed the grass wasn't just pressed flat, it was stained dark, almost black in the moonless light, and the smell of pennies hit me again. Stronger this time. I knelt down and touched it, my fingers coming away with ground beneath was warm, like it had been sitting under the sun all day, but the air was cool. I wiped my hand on my jeans, but the warmth seemed to stick to my skin like heat from a living thing. He turned to head back toward the trail, but there was no trail behind me, just trees in every direction. I spun slowly in place, trying to pick a direction. The trees all looked the same, the shadows bending at strange angles as if the branches were moving on their own. The ground was soft and uneven under my boots, and I felt the heat still clinging to my palm from where I had touched the dark grass in the clearing. The smell of metal was thicker here, almost coating the back of my throat, and each breath felt heavier than the last. Told myself to keep calm, just find the slope, listen for the trail crunch, but there was nothing, no sound, no wind. Even my footsteps sounded muffled, like I was walking on thick carpet. I pulled my flashlight from my pack and clicked it on the beam stretched out between the trunks, but seemed to die just a few feet away. The darkness ahead swallowing it like fog, except there was no mist, just the heavy air that pressed close around me. Picked a direction and started walking slow, careful to watch for any sign of the trail. The silence was so deep. Every creak of my gear, every brush of fabric against my jacket sounded like it was echoing from far away. I thought about calling out, but my voice felt trapped in my chest, like speaking here might be a mistake. Then the glow appeared again, between two trees about 20 yards ahead, bright and steady this time, not swaying. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, the shape of the lantern clear in the light, its cracked glass glinting, the metal frame rusted, and then I could almost hear something now, not a voice, but a low steady hum, like the noise you hear when standing near a transformer, only softer, warmer. He took a step toward it, and the hum grew louder. The glow tilted slightly like it was watching me, then it turned, drifting Away deeper into the woods I followed without thinking, the sound of my boots pressing into damp soil, matching the slow pull of that hum, the ground sloping gently down as if leading me somewhere specific. After a few minutes, the glow stopped just ahead in front of something pale and tall that my mind didn't register at first. Then the beam of my flashlight caught at a wooden post, carved like the trail marker back at the start. But this one had no writing. Instead, there were deep grooves, cut into it like symbols, not letters or numbers, but curling shapes and jagged lines. I ran my hand over the surface and the wood felt wrong to warm. Almost like skin stretched over. Bonetti lantern hung in the air above the post, the hum turning into a faint whisper. Words I couldn't quite make out. The sound was in my ears, but also inside my head, like it was bypassing my hearing entirely. I wanted to step back, but my legs felt heavy and rooted, my fingers still resting on the carved post. And I felt it, a vibration through the wood up my arm into my chest, my heartbeat stuttering to match it. The whisper growing clearer, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but the meaning pressed into my mind all the same, an invitation not to leave, but to come closer, deeper, to follow where the light would lead and never turn back. I yanked my hand away, stumbling back to steps, the hum cutting off so abruptly that my ears rang in the silence. The lantern dropped lower, almost to the ground, then slid toward a gap in the trees like a hand beckoning. I told myself again to turn back, to push through the trees and find the trail. But my feet moved forward on their own, my chest tight, my breath short, the air ahead growing colder. With each step the gap opened into a narrow path lined with stones on either side, each stone marked with a smear of something dark and dry, the smell of pennies sharper than ever. The lantern floated down the center, the glow flickering as if it was passing through moving water. I followed down that stone path, my shoulders brushing the trunks on both sides, the darkness pressing closer and closer, until it felt like I was walking through a living throat, the branches overhead tangling so thick that not a single bit of sky could be seen. The path ended at a small wooden bridge over a creek, the water below black and still like oil. The lantern paused at the middle of the bridge, hovering just above the railing. I stepped onto the wood. It groaned under my weight, the board soft with rot, my flashlight beam flicking over the water to see pale shapes just beneath the surface, long and thin and moving slightly, as if stirred by something slow. Halfway across the bridge, the lantern flared bright enough to throw sharp shadows across the trees. In that light I saw them, faces in the water, dozens of them just beneath the surface, eyes open mouths like the pale skin moving with the current, though I could see no current at all. Their hands floated up as if reaching for the air. For many visions swam my knees, threatening to give way, but I forced myself forward to the far side. The lantern drifting just ahead into another stretch of woods, these trees different, darker, their bark slick and shining like it had been polished, the ground covered in a thick layer of wet leaves that stuck to my boots with every step. The air smelled now not just of metal, but of something sour and sweet all at once, like rotting fruit left in the sun. He realized the hum had returned, faint but constant beneath the crunch of the leaves, and with it came a faint pulsing in my vision, like the trees were breathing in time with the sound. The lantern weaved between them, leading me toward Another faint clearing up ahead, but I could already see that this one wasn't like the last. The shapes moving at the edge of the light, tall and thin like the trees, but swaying in a way. The trunks didn't. The lantern stopped just before the clearing, as if waiting for me. I stood there just inside the line of trees, the glow ahead painting the clearing in pale yellow. My eyes straining to see what moved between the shadows. The shapes were tall then, their limbs bending in ways that didn't make sense. The more I looked, the more I saw they were not trees at all, but figures wrapped in strips of bark and moss, their faces hidden behind smooth pieces of wood carved with the same curling jagged lines. I had felt on that post. The air between us felt heavy, like water, and every instinct I had screamed to turn around, but the lantern swayed once, and the hum deep and low and steady like a heartbeat echoing in my Bonesi. Stepped forward into the clearing, the figures shifting aside to make space there, wooden faces turning to follow me as I passed between them. The ground was soft underfoot, sinking slightly with each step. From somewhere below came the faintest sound of running water. The lantern drifted toward the center where a circle of stones surrounded a hole in the earth, maybe 6 feet wide and so black inside. It was like looking into the mouth of something. Elevatum grew louder, the vibration crawling up my legs into my chest, the figures forming a loose ring around the stones, their heads bowing in unison. The lantern hovered directly above the hole. For the first time I could see that inside the cracked glass there was no flame, no bulb, only a tiny swirling mass of light like a miniature storm, clouds of pale gold folding in on themselves and flaring with faint arcs of lightning. I felt myself drawn to the edge of the hole, my toes nearly touching the inner ring of stones. The air rising from it cold and damp, smelling of wet leaves and rust. As I leaned forward, my flashlight beam fell into the darkness, was swallowed instantly. The hum, now so loud it seemed to come from inside my own skull. I heard them, the voices, not whispers, not words, but something deeper, a layered sound like dozens of people speaking underwater. My chest tightened, my vision swimming, and before I knew it, I was kneeling at the edge, my hands resting on the cold stones, my head bowing without me, meaning to the lantern's glow spilling down into the hole and stirring. Something far below. Figures moved closer, their wooden faces almost touching mine from either side. I could feel the heat of their presence, though their bodies were cold to the touch. When one of them placed a long, thin hand on my shoulder, its weight was strangely light, but the pressure behind it was immense, like I was being pressed down into the earth itself. Voices swelled, and from the darkness rose a faint glimmer, the same kind of swirling light that burned inside the lantern. It twisted upward like smoke, but held together like a rope, and as it neared the surface, I saw shapes in it, faces just like the ones in the creek. Their eyes wide, their mouths moving in silent cries, their features twisting and bending into one another as if they were all part of the same endless body. He tried to pull back, but the hand on my shoulder tightened and another settled on the back of my neck, pushing me closer to the hole, the cold air spilling over my face, the smell of metal so sharp my eyes watered. The swirling light reached the rim, and I could see now that it was pulling at me, my reflection bending and stretching inside it, until I no longer recognized my own face. The hum became a single deep tone that vibrated through My teeth through my skull and into the base of my spine. The light flared, and in it, I saw the lantern again, but this time it was not in front of me, it was inside me. As if my chest had been hollowed out and the storm of gold had taken its place. Every beat of my heart sending arcs of lightning. Through my vines, figures stepped back, their heads tilting in unison, the hands releasing me. But I could not stand, my body trembling. My breath ragged, the swirling light slowly sank back into the hole, pulling with it something I could not see but could feel like the last threads of warmth. Leaving my body, the lantern above dimmed to a faint ember, and then winked out. The clearing plunged into darkness. He was alone. I could not see the figures. I could not hear the hum, only the faint rush of blood in my ears. I stumbled back from the hole, my foot catching on one of the stones and sending me to the ground. My hand sinking into the soft earth that now felt warm, as if something below was still moving. You forced myself up and turned toward the line of trees where the path should have been. But the woods had changed again, the trunks leaning at strange angles, the branches tangled so thick they formed walls. I pushed through them, the bark slick and cold against my arms, my breath coming fast, the smell of wet leaves was clinging to me, the ground sloping upward until I burst out onto a narrow trail. It was not the same trail I had come in on. The gravel here was darker, the trees spaced farther apart, but I could see a faint light ahead and I ran toward it. My boots pounding the ground, the light growing brighter, until I could see the shape of the bitter ash trailhead sign. In its glow we stumbled into the open lot, gasping. The night air sharp in my lungs, my truck sitting exactly where I had left it. The only sound, the ticking of its cooling engine. I looked back once, and there in the darkness, just beyond the sign, a single faint yellow glow swayed between the trees. Waiting, she climbed into my truck, started the engine, and drove without looking into the rear view. The smell of metal still in my nose, the warmth still clinging to my palm, where I had touched the stones, and in the back of my mind, beneath the hum of the tires on the road, I could hear it again, that low, deep tone like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I had heard about Cinderwash Trailhead from a park ranger who swore up and down that if you valued your peace of mind, you'd never set foot on it after dark. He told me in that dead serious way older rangers get when they talk about things they can't quite explain, a kind of quiet in their voice that tells you they've seen something. And they know you won't believe it, but they need to say it anyway. He said the trail was fine in daylight, though even then folks sometimes felt watched. But at night the whole place changed, the air got thick, the sounds died out. And if you went far enough, you'd hear the water. Thing is, there's no river in that part of the park, not for miles. Ranger said it didn't matter, people still swore they heard running water like it was just up ahead, just out of sight. And if they went toward it, they never came back, at least not the same. Cinderwash sits at the edge of the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas, but it's not on the main maps. The dirt lot where the trail begins isn't even paved, no official restrooms, no information board. Just a hand-carved sign on weathered cedar with the name burned into it. Cinderwash Trailhead in big block letters, and below it in smaller script, someone had carved, "Keep to the dry ground." Night I went out there, I pulled into that empty lot and cut the engine, the sound of the crickets and the distant wind in the trees filling the air The moon was low, throwing silver light over the gravel, and the cedars signed the letters dark against the wood. My boots crunched loud as I stepped out, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke, though there was no fire anywhere nearby. I started down the trail, and right away I could feel it, the way the ground sloped down like it was leading me into something. The dirt was dry, but soft under my boots, pine needles scattered over it, the smell of damp earth sneaking in. Though it hadn't rained in weeks, I brought a flashlight, but the first stretch, the trail was lit enough by the moon filtering through the trees. So I kept it off, trying to let my eyes adjust, trying to listen. A couple 100 yards in, I heard it faint at first, like a whisper just beyond the reach of my ears, the sound of trickling water. I stopped, tilted my head, sure I'd imagined it, but there it was again, steady, slow, like a creek flowing over stones. I shook it off, figuring maybe there was a small stream nearby. Ranger had just been exaggerating. She walked on, the sound getting a little louder with each bend in the trail. The trees crowding closer, their trunks thick and rough, the bark catching pale moonlight. In thin lines, the air was cooler here, almost damp, the smell of wet leaves strong enough to make me breathe shallow, my boots slipping once on loose dirt as the slope grew steeper. Then I saw the first marker, a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, sitting in the middle of the trail, carved with a single line like a tally mark. I crouched to look at it, running my fingers over the groove. It was fresh cut, sharp-edged, not weathered like you'd expect out here. I looked around but saw nothing else, no more stones, no signs of anyone carving it. A few minutes later I heard something new, mixed with the water's murmur, a faint creak like wood bending. I turned in a slow circle, but saw only trees, their branches still in the night air. My skin prickled. I started walking faster, the flashlight now in my hand, the beam cutting through the dark, the sound of water close enough now that I could almost smell it, cold and clean. When I found the bridge, I was small, only wide enough for one person to cross at a time. The boards warped and dark with age, the railings nothing more than to thin beams nailed into posts. It stretched over a gully that should have been dry, but wasn't. I leaned over the side and my breath caught the water below was black, not dark blue or brown like river water, but black like ink. The surface still and glassy, but moving beneath with slow swirling shapes that didn't match any current I'd ever seen. The air above it was colder by at least 10 degrees, the smell sharp and mineral like wet stone. My flashlight beam slid over the surface. I saw faces, they're faint and pale just under the water, eyes, open lips moving slow, as if they were trying to speak, but the sound I heard wasn't words. It was that same creak of bending wood, deep and low, halfway across the bridge. The boards beneath me gave a soft groan and the water rippled, as though something large had shifted below. My hands tightened on the railing, splinters catching my skin, and I hurried the rest of the way, my boots hitting the dirt hard. On the far side I turned back and the bridge was empty, but the water below was still rippling slowly in wide circles. The trail narrowed here, the trees leaning in from both sides. The sound of water followed me, though I could see no stream. The air heavier now, each breath damp in my chest. Then I spotted the lantern glow up ahead, faint between the trunks, swaying gently, as if someone were walking just out of sight. The glow swayed again, like whoever held it had paused, waiting for me to catch up, my boots crunching over damp dirt. that seemed to darken as I moved forward, the smell of wet earth growing stronger until it felt like it was sticking to the inside. My nose, I kept my flashlight low, careful not to blind myself in the reflected light. The lantern ahead to steady for wind, and to deliver it to be some accident of light, he called out a soft "Hey, you out here later?" The sound of my voice fell flat like the trees were swallowing it whole. There was no echo, no return, just that wet smell. In the faint swaying of the glow, it shifted slightly deeper into the woods. My legs moved without my say-so, the ground spongy underfoot now, like layers of soaked leaves hidden under the dirt. After maybe a minute, the lantern stopped at a break in the trees where the trail widened into another bridge. But this one was different. The boards were newer but painted a strange dark red, and the posts on either side were carved with those same tally marks I'd seen earlier in the stone. Some sets of 1, some sets of 5 with the cross line. Like someone had been counting something right here. The paint was chipped in places and I could see pale wood beneath, but it felt wrong, like it had soaked up more than just rain over the years. I stepped onto it slow, my boots thudding in time with my heartbeat, and peered over the side. The gully below was wider than the first, the same black water swirling, slow shapes drifting in and out of view, some thin and twisting like branches, others thicker, almost human. My flashlight beam caught something pale that rolled over. Just under the surface, it was a face, but not still like the others. Its eyes moved, its mouth opening into a slow, soundless scream before it sank back down out of sight. The water closing over it without a ripple. Halfway across, I froze. The lantern was at the far end, hovering just above the ground, and behind it the trail dipped into a kind of fog, low and heavy like steam off a river on a cold morning. I heard that same deep creak again, not from the bridge this time, but from the water itself. Like the surface was flexing under strain, I hurried the rest of the way, and when my boots hit dirt, the glow slid into the fog, pulling me after it. Fog closed round me, quick, cold, and wet on my skin, muffling every sound. My flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead, and I could feel the ground tilting down again. Water sounds close now, like it was running right beside me. Though I could see nothing but gray, the lantern kept moving steady, the only clear thing in the whole space. My chest tight as I followed it until I noticed shapes in the fog, tall and narrow on both sides. At first I thought they were just trees, but as I passed I saw the truth. They were posts, dozens of them each, with something tied to it with thick dark rope. The shape slumped and still at first, but as I looked closer, I saw pale fingers hanging loose, hair matted against skulls, faces bowed low, like they'd been standing there a long time. Some had tally marks carved into their skin, dark grooves filled with dried black crust. Their bare feet sunk ankle deep into the damp ground. Fog swirled, and for a moment I swore some of them turned their heads to follow me, slow and stiff, their eyes the same pale as the faces in the water. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles aching, the beam shaking across the mist. The lantern ahead, never slowing, never stopping. The ground grew wetter. With each step, my boots sinking slightly, a cold seeping in that went straight to my bones. The sound of water rushing just ahead, and then suddenly the fog broke open. I was standing at the edge of a wide pool fed by nothing, I could see the black surface swirling in slow circles, and in the center rising out of the water was a small island of stone, maybe 10 feet across. The lantern hovered at the edge of pool, and in the faint light I saw a narrow plank stretching from the shore to the island. Though dark with age, the surface licked the water below so still it might have been painted glass, until I saw the shapes moving under it, slow circling. Thicker now than before, in the island stood something tall, wrapped in strips of rotting cloth. Its head bowed, its arms long enough to hang almost to the ground. The cloth hung loose in places, revealing glimpses of gray skin underneath, carved with deep grooves that glistened wet in the lantern's glow. Its breathing was slow, deep, and heavy enough that I could see the cloth shift with each inhale. The lantern drifted onto the plank and waited like it expected me to follow. I swear the cold that night wasn't from the weather. It had this way of settling into my bones, like it belonged there, like something had been waiting for me to walk far enough off the trail so it could crawl inside and stay there for good. Flashlight was still in my hand, but my wrist had started trembling bad enough that the beam shook across the ground like a busted street light. And every time the light brushed over those trees, their bark looked darker than it should have been. Like the black wasn't shadow, but something elevate called out again. But this time my own voice came back wrong, not just an echo, but an answer. It sounded like me, but it was coming from somewhere just past where the beam stopped. It was softer, like a whisper through teeth, and I'll be honest, that was the first time I thought about just turning around and running full tilt out of there. But it's like the ground had me. Every step I took felt like it was sinking an inch deeper. Then the last one, I finally saw the clearing. I knew right away it was a natural, perfect circle. Trees ended sharp like someone had cut them down with a giant blade, and in the middle, God, in the middle was this hole in the earth, not big like a mine entrance, more like the mouth of a well, but wider, ragged like it had been clawed out from underneath. Smell hit before I got close, rot, then something sharp like metal left out in the rain. I leaned over just enough to see down, and the beam of my flashlight disappeared before hitting the bottom. It was too deep. Or maybe there wasn't a bottom. Then I heard the breathing, slow and steady, but not human. It rattled like it was fighting through water in its lungs and the ground under. My boots shifted just a little, like something big had rolled over under there. That's when I felt the first tug on my ankle, not strong, almost gentle, like it was testing my weight. I didn't even have to look down to know there was nothing there. I could see, but the dirt around my boot was moving, parting in little lines, like fingers pressing up from underneath. He backed up quick, but it followed every step I took away from that hole. The ground swelled in a ripple right under me. I could feel it keeping pace, and the whole time it was breathing louder, closer, wet and heavy. When I hit the tree line again, I made the mistake of looking back. I swear on everything I've got left that the hole was smaller, like it was closing, but something pale was still reaching out from the edge. Not a hand, not exactly, more like a stretch of skin that didn't end, pulling itself back down slowly. Didn't stop running until I hit the trailhead sign. By then my breath felt like glass in my chest. The gravel lot was empty, not a single car, not even mine, just a sign with a rattlesnake jaw carved into it and fresh dirt under the posts, like the whole thing had just been planted there that morning. I walked the road for hours before a truck finally came to the guy driving wouldn't look me in the eye. He just told me I shouldn't have been out there after dark and dropped me in town without another word. That was 3 weeks ago. And every night since I hear it under my floorboards. That slow rattling breath and the faint scrape of dirt shifting like it's making its way closer.